Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I know it might take a few minutes for folks to get in, so we'll give you a few minutes, but thank you so much for joining us today. This is actually my first LinkedIn Live. Is this your first LinkedIn Live as well, Tom?
It is, yeah. I've seen them online, but I've never participated, and I've definitely never been on camera with someone like yourself before.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to today's conversation, and it's short but sweet, so we'll get going soon, but we'll just give folks a minute or two to come in and join today. So maybe just a few comments while everyone is joining. So I'm Sara Chizzo. I'm a commercial director here at Fuse Universal. And welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining today. So because we aren't going to be able to interact with those of you in the live session live, if as you're coming in, if you could leave a quick chat where you're dialing in from, then we can know who's on the call. So go ahead and do that. Also, throughout the session, we'll be having a moderator take a look at comments that are coming through in the chat. So if you have any questions for us, a comment that you want to make about something we're talking about or anything like that, please do go ahead and put those comments in the chat and we'll try to address them as well. So thank you so much again. Hi, Phil. Hi, Nihal. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. So I'll just quickly comment again. As you're coming in, feel free to chat. Let us know where you're dialing in from. And we'll try to get some conversation going around this topic today. All right, so one more time, I'm Sara Chizzo. I'm a commercial director here at Fuse. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. I'm very, very excited to talk about this topic today with our special guest and good industry friend and partner in crime of mine, Tom Kupetis, who I'll have introduce himself in just a moment. What we're talking about today is to understand how to create a recipe for success in a partnership between clients and technology partners in particular. And this is something that Tom and I are very passionate about. And Tom will talk a little bit about the organization he represents. And we hope to share some thoughts, ideas, perspectives, best practices, maybe a tool or two that you might be able to use to help facilitate a great partnership. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Tom to introduce himself and St. Charles Consulting.
Thanks, Sara. And thanks, everybody, for joining us this morning here on a Tuesday, a rainy Tuesday here in the greater Chicago area. So my name is Tom Kupetis. I'm managing partner at St. Charles Consulting Group. St. Charles has been around for almost 20 years, and our focus is really, we are a strategic consulting firm that specializes in talent development and learning professional services. Those services fall into some very broad categories. I'll just touch on those briefly because I think they're relevant to our topic in today's conversation. So we provide strategic consulting services of all shapes and sizes, from very broad enterprise services to very specific endeavors related to whether it's an audience or a role or a function. We do custom content design and development of all modalities. We've got a thriving curation practice, as well as a series of managed services, project engagement management, facilitation management, technology platform adoption and selection. So those are just some highlights of what we do as a firm, and we look forward to today's conversation. So thank you.
Excellent. So, Tom, we've known each other for a number of years, and I know that at St. Charles Consulting, you do very strategic types of engagements with senior L&D leaders in particular. And those can take the form of strategy, enablement. You described some examples of that. I've also observed over the years that you've developed longstanding relationships with many of the companies that you engage with and have that tail in the relationship over many years. And so one of the things that I'd love if you could talk about is what some of your observations are for creating a great partnership and setting that partnership up for success in the early going.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. You're right. Our firm prides ourselves on the tenure of the client relationships. And I think a lot of that is driven by simply the ability to demonstrate value, right? And in any client relationship, I never like the word vendor because it implies a very, low amount of value being delivered and somewhat of a commoditized product. And so when we think about relationships with clients, it's all about business value. And oftentimes when we're doing a strategic consulting engagement, obviously you're at Fuse now, you were at another, technology provider and content provider before that. And I think technology providers in particular, it's really critical that they figure out how to best position their services and demonstrate that business value, as opposed to running the risk of being seen as a commodity. When we are out doing strategic consulting, oftentimes our clients come to us and trust us because we really don't have a horse in the race. We as a firm don't have any particular technology. We partner with organizations like yourselves. And what we find is when the buyers get into talking about technology selection as part of a broader engagement, which often happens, they'll turn to us and ask for our help because, again, we're sort of an unbiased, objective third party. And one of the things we see that happens probably more often than we'd like it to is the buyer, the business buyer, or the learning and development leader from a buyer perspective. Sometimes they won't always cast the widest angle lens in their review and selection criteria. And the focus ends up being too much on a particular innovation or feature or function of a technology. And we really try and bring them back towards what are we trying to achieve? What business metrics are we trying to impact positively? And how are we going to know if we were successful? Beginning with the end in mind, what is success going to look like at the end of some technology adoption, implementation, configuration? And so an example would be, I had a client one time that was in the process of selecting and adopting a new learning management system. And we were involved on a number of fronts strategically on the front end. And it became enamored with the fact that this client had a mobile app. And it was a few years ago, so mobile apps weren't nearly as prevalent. And we really had to try and get them off the focus of the mobile app. But the vendor in this case was selling the fact that, X% of your audience, more than 50%, are going to engage mobilely. And so they kind of fixated on that. And not that that's a bad thing, because it's good to be mobile, but we try to pull it back and say, let's look at this more broadly.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great example, and navigating that can be tricky. So keeping that North Star on the business value component is an important piece of that. And to that end, you and I have been in this space for a while, done some work in connecting the application of learning and development to business outcomes. And that's a really, really important piece of creating a partnership, because we know that L&D can be a huge driver for change within an organization and a huge driver for business impact and the ability to optimize that impact for the business. And so I'm wondering if you can share some of the practical things that you bring to the partnership with prospective clients and clients to help facilitate that and support that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too philosophical, but the role of L&D and impacting business value is one that is important, but I think sometimes often not considered, or maybe in some cases overlooked. And I think we get ourselves into that situation sometimes, right? I always make the comment about, if you're in IT and you're going to make an investment in capital expenditure or software or infrastructure, there's got to be a strong business case and ROI associated with it. Oftentimes, that's not the case. And I think the role of L&D continues to evolve and shift, right? Where we talked about this concept of contribution versus consumption. And the old line model of L&D was everything was, created, bought, or built from the center and then distributed out to the learner audience. And with technology like Fuse enabling communities and participation and collaboration and development, that's changing. So how does the role of L&D evolve to demonstrate the value they play in this process of being a curator, an aggregator, a facilitator of connection and community within an organization, and harness the power of the individual and the group and the community. So, that's kind of at the, I don't want to say existential, but, at the higher philosophical level. And I think it's important to embrace that and determine within your own organization, how can you position yourself effectively to make sure you're part of that planning, solution, and conversation, and it doesn't happen in and around you, outside of you. More specifically, I think we've gotten very good at helping clients think through the value chain by using this simple tool that we call a business impact map or a value map. And it's not an original idea to St. Charles, but the concept of being able to link what's in the learning solution, the desired performance, the strategic linkage to that performance, and then ultimately some financial impact or assumptions that you've made relative to how are you going to impact the organization strategically and financially. They work very well because you're able to, in one single frame, spell out where those connections are happening. And then it also sets up a measurement strategy. One of the things we do a lot in strategic consulting is help organizations with measurement strategies. That is particularly at the initiative level. So if you're implementing a new leadership development model, or you're adopting a new process, or you're trying to launch a new product, or increase CSAT or Net Promoter Score, how are you going to show those linkages?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I appreciate your sharing that tool, and I think that is a critical part of that conversation and the relationship as we're setting it up front, to ensure that we're all continually pointed in the same direction. And it also resonated to me, and we talk about this a lot here at Fuse, the role of L&D as sort of command and control versus enablement. And you mentioned enablement early on in the conversation. And I think it's very, very interesting when you think about that evolving role of L&D and how can you unlock the potential of your employees, recognizing that we, of course, have to facilitate to some degree learning happening across the organization without hampering the natural learning that occurs as well.
Yeah. Well, I think to that end, just a quick thought that popped in my head, we're all living through COVID, unprecedented times. It's having an impact on organizations across the board in almost all cases, with a few exceptions. And organizations are in many cases belt tightening, looking at how to control costs. L&D, you all know, is one of the very first places people will look. Contracting of consumption of learning, et cetera. And that's a very unsettling and nervous time for a lot of folks. And it's probably more important than ever to think about how you're viewed from a business value perspective and that impact, so as to kind of go on the offense in terms of justifying the value that you're delivering in the organization.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. It actually leads me to my next question, which is perception and how we come to that partnership, right? Whether the partnership be with a technology partner and a client, or a client and their internal stakeholders. And I think back to a client who has joined our family recently, and we started that partnership doing a project for them. Actually, it was a project around COVID, a very strategic project to help them after the lockdown bring their employees back to work. And you get excited about partnerships, you get excited about the potential impact you can have, especially in their case, because the impact was bringing people back to work, for one, which is huge. And then the second was bringing them back to work safely. And as part of the partnership, we actually initially had to say no to the project because we didn't think that we could execute it flawlessly. And that's really, really hard. And that's something that I think maybe in the years that we've been in this position that we've gotten a little bit more comfortable with, but it's still hard to do that, especially when you can do great work. Ultimately, we ended up being able to come to a place where we could do the project and do it successfully. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about kind of the power of the partnership and how sometimes, there's power in saying no, as a way to create a win-win for both. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I completely agree that the word no can be very powerful. You want it to be powerful and positive, though, right? In some
Yeah.
regards. And positive can mean a couple of different things, right? There's always opportunity cost as an organization. And so if you think about the conflicting interest in a scenario where, let's just say, you're a Fuse sales representative with a quota, right? And you're in front of a client who is seeing some need for your product, but the salesperson might be sitting there saying, he or she might be feeling, well, I'm not really sure that they quite get the linkage and they see the value of what our technology does, but I've got a number to make, and so we'll go with this, right? But the reality is sometimes the best answer might be no, because you may end up signing a contract, have a really rough implementation, and then when the rubber meets the road, the client doesn't see the value, and therefore you've wasted that opportunity. You've got an unhappy client. You likely have a relatively short-lived client relationship, where if you redirect that energy towards something that's a better fit, it's likely to have that long-standing, trusted business partnership that you're looking for as an organization. Now, that's easy for me to say. It's a little bit more challenging to do when you're in the heat of the moment. And part of the reason people come to us and engage us, as I said, we don't have a horse in the race. And oftentimes we'll play the role of at least that kind of first filter when it comes to selecting technologies in particular. As an example, the term LXP is super hot right now, and people are all trying to figure out, do they need an LXP? Should they have an LXP? I don't really consider Fuse an LXP per se, but when people come to us and say, oh, we want an LXP, we start asking questions about, what do you mean by LXP? What experience are you looking to facilitate? And if the first three answers are curation, curation, and curation, well, that sets up one answer. And frankly, it's probably not Fuse necessarily. It wouldn't be the first place to go. However, if they start talking about, we've got communities that we want to enable, and we want to facilitate connection, and we want to harness the power of the knowledge that's out in our audience, whether that be across geographies, across functions, locations, whatever it might be, then you guys could be a really good fit. And so really thinking about where you demonstrate that value and where you fit in the market relative to the business problem. And again, back to the impact map, and then be able to articulate that. Those maps work well in your own organization to justify your existence, quote unquote. They're even more powerful with a client. To be able to show the client, this is how you're thinking about their problem, that's where it really comes alive. And I know we've only got a couple minutes left. I will quickly, Nihal, if we can, just share an example of a map here. And if anyone who's participating in viewing this, if anyone would like to get a copy of this, happy to share it with you after the fact via email. And we've got some language in here around each category, from learning to performance to strategic to financial objectives, and kind of how to fill this out, but happy to provide this as a template and a guide. Again, it's not the answer, but it's one answer.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much for that. I have a comment that's come in that I wanted to share, Tom, just to get our perspective on. So thank you, Inky. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So mobile learning has been around prior to the pandemic, but how do you see this having evolved during and after the pandemic? And how is this, maybe to add my own perspective, how does this potentially change the way that we think about learning going forward?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think mobile continues to play a role in terms of, we can be anywhere at any time doing our job as long as we have connectivity. And sometimes that connectivity is through the mobile device. Zoom, as an example, is the technology we use for virtual connection within our firm, and they've got a great mobile app. And I've seen people driving in their car with their phone on the dashboard connected to Zoom. I caution them to pay very close attention to the road and not get distracted. So I think, I don't know that mobile has necessarily increased, but that virtual connection and the cultural acceptance in many organizations where it was almost verboten to not be in the office all the time, or is changing. I think we're untethered in many ways. Although we've been talking about it, I think COVID has forced that in some cases, and for the better, in a positive way.
And I would agree that mobile is a vehicle. One of the things that I've almost seen more as an extension to that is the desire for folks to be leaning on one another, especially in a world where employees and customers and partners may have been more connected face to face. So getting folks together in communities, for example, and getting folks together in purposeful and meaningful ways through online vehicle, mobile being one of the ways that you can do that, can be really helpful, not only to make them feel connected and understand where their work fits in with the current situation, but also to see that then as an ongoing place of support and learning to occur. And hopefully that facilitates them continuing to take everyone to take a little bit more ownership for learning themselves as well.
I feel like facilitating personal connection, even if it's not in person, is more important than it ever has been, and it will continue to be for people's emotional, physical, and corporate, if you will, well-being, to be a well-rounded person, employee. So yeah, I agree 100%.
Excellent. I can't believe how quickly our time has gone. So we're sitting a little bit over 20 minutes here. And so I think we're going to need to wrap it up. But I just wanted to maybe give you a moment, Tom, to maybe say any parting words. I really appreciate everything you've shared today. I think there was a lot of really good information in there. And thank you for offering to share the business impact map, the value map, with folks on this call if they want that information. Any additional parting words before we leave today?
Just a big thank you and a virtual hug to you, and appreciate you inviting me to do this, and everyone who was able to join. Happy to share that impact map, or if anyone wants to keep the conversation going, happy to do that as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who's joined today. And hopefully you'll join us for FuseDay Tuesday next week as well. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye, everybody.